All right. So thanks again for having me. I'm going to talk on the topic of in the pursuit of interpretability, where I argue that good intentions are not enough. I'm talking about a lot of work with a lot of awesome people inside and outside of Google. So if you're in this talk, you're probably interested in AI. And if you're thinking, oh, that's not me, then check again where you are. You might be in the wrong session. But assuming that you're in the right session, chances are that you probably trained a model or two, perhaps used one, or maybe seen someone training one. And here's a cartoon that describes such a process. And I'm curious if you resonate with what these two stick figures are about to say. One says, this is your machine learning system. Yep, you pour the data into this big pile of linear algebra, then collect the answers on the other side. What if the answers are wrong? Well, just stir the pile until they start looking right. And if you were in person, I typically ask the audience how many people think that this reflects the truth. And majority of the time, majority of them raise their hands. And is this a problem? Well, every day we're fascinated by AI, what they can do, and we're excited. So we're trying new ideas, we build bigger models, we gather more data, we try new way of training, maybe self-learning, and this is all great. And thanks to that, we have seen unprecedented advances in AI. AI has definitely let its name known as one of the most powerful tools for so many applications. But whenever we encounter something this powerful, it should make us pause, because this sounds too good to be true. Are we sure that things are going to the right direction in the long term? Or will we look back in 20 years and have any regrets about what we are doing now? One answer to answer these questions is to know what we are doing and know what our models know, which means in improving interpretability. And this talk is about that. So when a lot of folks think about interpretability as just a tool to do more responsible AI, and it is a tool to improve responsibility, the more we know about what we do, the more we become conscious about what we are doing. But it's not just about that. The goal is much broader, and interpretability is much more fundamental component in problem solving. And so the reason we need interpretability is because many problems we're trying to solve are underspecified. What does that mean? Well, it just means that we cannot fully and exhaustively list out all the criteria. And once these are all met, then you're all good to go, 100%. You just simply can't do that a lot of times. And sometimes humans don't even know exactly what they want. So here's some examples. Safety. What does it mean to have safe self-driving cars? Can we list out all the possible scenarios that this car might encounter in its lifetime and list out what is the safe thing to do at each of those cases? Probably not. And if you're familiar with the trolley problem, the cruel but a moral question where it goes that you are driving a train and you can pull a lever to either kill these 4 people who happens to be tied on the rail or this one other person. And what's the right thing to do? What is safe thing to do? And that's like a very classical question that philosophers study. And according to that, like sometimes we don't even know what the right thing to do. Another example is science. People use machine learning to discover something new. And discover something new, you're trying to discover new things. So you don't know what that is. So of course, you can't specify what you're trying to discover. Lastly, mismatched objectives. You might create a system with good intentions that may have side effects because you didn't know which side effects perhaps this pill that might have on a patient. Maybe patient strongly wants to avoid weight gain or depression, but this pill just fixes sinus, not just is aimed to fix sinus. Then is it worth doing? What we are optimizing may not be the thing that we want to optimize. So I hope I convinced you that this is fundamental to a problem solving that more data or a little clever algorithm cannot solve. And this is a lot more fundamental to lots of questions that we want to answer using this powerful tool. So you may say, all right, that sounds pretty good. I'm down. Let's get going. Tell me more about interpretability. Before that, I want to add one more nuance to this. It's a little complicated. So what do I mean? Well, I'm here to tell you a little bit unknowing fact. Interpretability is one of those fields where good intentions are not enough. It's not just, okay, I want to improve interpretability, so let's do it. Let's try really, really hard until we're all convinced that we've improved interpretability. It's a good start, but it doesn't always work. Well, why not? Well, one of the reasons is the very fact that these methods are for us, humans, and we are the ones evaluating them. And that makes us vulnerable and exposed to our own biases and judgments. Also, our natural inclination is to focus on making a new way to be more interpretable, but that sometimes is not the most important thing to do. It's important to develop new method. I do it too. But I think the problem we're trying to solve is so hard and so complex that we have to go sort of beyond that. And we have to think critically about what we're doing in every single step in the way. So in this talk, I'm going to talk about major 3 things that aren't enough and suggest first steps towards each item. First of all, just making new method is not enough. We've made a lot of methods, maybe too many, definitely too many, each of which gives different explanation for the same model. And more recently, there has been a family of work from skeptics who've shown that the explanation might not be the thing that you think they're showing. And I will present a series of this work and of this flavor that we did over the past few years. Second, we made a lot of methods, mostly thinking about us, machine learning experts, in mind. But machine learning is such a powerful tool that should be accessible to non-machine learning experts and not just serve a particularly privileged population, us. So I argue that we have to actively think about equitable usage of this technology. So we propose a method that can provide explanations in the language of a user, regardless of their machine learning expertise. And they can communicate as if they're just communicating with another human. Lastly, one progress is not enough. When we write a paper, we know that there are bits and pieces that we could do better, we can improve, which we put it in the future work as if we're actually going to work on them. But the truth is that we want someone else's to work on them. Well, at least I was like that. Here, I wanted to show you a family of work, a line of work that was first conceived more than 3 years ago. And lots of work continued every time when we stopped and asked, how can we do better? How can we improve this? And of course, with a lot of help from many smart people that I was fortunate to collaborate with. So let's jump right in. We need testing. First, we need testing because developing method is not enough. And often than not, the wrong explanation is worse than not giving any explanations at all. So focus of this section of the talk is post-training interpretability method. What is that? Well, it just means that somebody gave you a model and you cannot change the model. And your goal is to find the evidence of prediction. In other words, if you have a model that takes an image and tells what's in the image, why was this a junco bird? Why was it predicted as junco bird? Now, one way to define explanation in this work is a sensitivity test. So tell me how sensitive the prediction is when we change each input feature. So in this case, pixel. In more technical terms, you can use first order derivative. So probability of the logit with respect to every single pixel. And intuitively, this is testing if I change this 1 pixel, how much would the probability of a junco bird changes? If it changes a lot, it's an important pixel. If it doesn't, it's not an important pixel. So thanks to this kind of elegant but simple idea, there has been explosion of methods. here are some popular methods. I wrote a paper about another method in 2018, and so on. So when you look at this, it kind of makes sense. Okay, so the popular method 1 looks like maybe it's looking at the belly of the bird. Maybe my work and others are looking at maybe the cheek of the bird. Sure, it kind of makes sense. But let's stop and ask to check that what we're seeing or what we think we're seeing. So what I told you is that these pixels are the evidence of prediction. So whatever function that generated these map, whatever that is, takes the prediction as an input. So that means that if the prediction changes, the explanation should probably change because the input to the function has changed. In extreme case, if the prediction is random, then the explanation, the output, should really change. So we tested that. Here we took a perfectly good, well-trained image classification network, got a lot of pictures, just birds and dogs and whatnot, and got a lot of saliency maps. And then we copied the same network and start randomizing the learned weights from the top level in a cascading manner. So first we randomize the last layer, and then last 2 layers, last 3 layers, and so on. So now as soon as you randomize any layer, the prediction is random. This is garbage network. So you would think that explanation should change. Well, it doesn't. And you might see, well, okay, well, these 2 pictures are not identical. Like maybe the bottom picture has more spots in the sky. But remember, the final consumer of these methods are humans. And as a human, I don't think I will draw a different conclusion based on these 2 things. The belly of the bird still looks important. Maybe the cheek of the bird still equally looks important in either picture. In fact, the 6 pictures that I showed you a couple of slides ago, 3 of these are generated from random network. Can you guess which ones are from random network? It's probably one of the 2 popular methods, maybe one of my work. 3 out of these pictures, 6 pictures are random from the random network. I'll be very impressed if you can guess, because I still can't guess. The answer is popular method 2, my work 18 number 2, and popular method number 4. Those are explanations from random network with random prediction. So here are some popular methods that we tested in the original work, and we're showing you a cascading manner randomization. So the second column is just logic layer randomized, all the way to in the last column, you're looking at completely random network. And as you can see, some methods don't even change as we randomize this network. So after this, we were scratching our back of our heads and say, okay, this is weird. So let's try something differently crazy. So instead of randomizing a trained network, let's train a network with random labels and see what happens. If the labels are random, the network isn't going to learn anything, right? However, in the second row, the network trained with random labels, it seems to show that this network might be hinting that it might have learned something. In this case, the MNIST is at 0, where it really didn't learn anything. So that's equally concerning. So since this work came out, it has become one of the go-to tests for pixel-based interpretability methods. And I see reviewers asking for them, authors already including the test in their papers. And there has been a number of great work that keeps this healthy skeptical point of view of what we're doing. There's recent work on calling gradients in question, and lots of great line of work to continue the good science. Before I move on, if there's any questions, please do interrupt. So this work was fun, but then there's this question is keep bugging us that, okay, well, sure, these explanations don't really, maybe not have nothing to do with prediction that it was claiming to explain, but we've seen many papers that worked with domain experts like doctors and showed that because of these explanations, doctors were able to do some tasks better. So why is that? Maybe there are some tasks that these explanations do help. So to test that idea in the follow-up work, we design an experiment where we intentionally inject bugs that typical machine learning engineer might encounter, like maybe they have a labeling errors, and maybe they had spurious correlation, and perhaps at test time they had auto distribution data, and to see whether these explanation methods can tell us anything. So what we did is we recruited a bunch of workers and we told them, okay, you work at a startup, you're selling animal classification machine learning model. Here are some images, and here's the prediction, here's the explanation, the attribution maps. And we asked, would you recommend this model? Should we sell it? And if yes or no, why? Was it because of wrong or correct label, or the prediction, or the explanation? Note that we gave them the prediction label, which could be completely confounding factors of our findings. We decided to do that because it's just unrealistic to not have prediction label. You have a model that you trained. Why wouldn't you have a prediction and just explanation? That just doesn't make much sense. And despite that, we discover things that are very interesting. So here I'm showing you 4 models. Each line is a model. One of them is trained with this input data distribution, which is a fashion MNIST, a typical like a black and white and objects. I wonder if you can guess which model is within distribution. So which one of ABCD model is trained with fashion MNIST? I'll be again very impressed if anybody can do this. The answer is A. And if you're not sure, you're with our subjects. They were uncertain. They were if you see the confidence level 1 to 5 is kind of all over the place for 3 methods that we tested. But the reason they were uncertain wasn't because of explanation, it was because of wrong label, the prediction label. In fact, some of them thought that explanations were as expected, as I also thought that way. And this is exactly the case where having explanation did more harm than good, because they could have been more suspicious. However, explanation worked as expected and provided that false evidence of trust. Here's another different kind of bug that we tested, spurious correlation. So here I am showing you one model, and I'm curious if you can tell which label this model was trained with. So it could have been classifying the scenery, the ocean, or was it classifying the bird? Was it the object or the ocean? And one of them is spurious because we intentionally correlated whenever there's an ocean, we put the bird on it, or the other way around, to create that correlation. So was it the bird or was it the ocean that we're classifying? The answer is the bird, the ocean. So bird is the spurious correlation. And it turns out that subjects can kind of tell from this explanation that, yeah, the birds, there's something wrong with the explanation. So a lot of subjects were uncertain about deploying this model, and the reasons were most of the time unexpected explanation. So that's good. That's pretty hopeful. However, there's a twist. So in ongoing work, we're testing, so what kind of spurious correlation can this explanation methods tell us? What about the tags? Like maybe there's a hospital tag in this medical image. MGH is a hospital in Boston. Or maybe there's random stripes appear in these images for some artificial reasons. If that were spurious correlation, can these methods tell us? Or even worse, maybe it's like Gaussian blur that is less visible to human eyes, kind of all over dispersed in the image. And TLDR is, it depends. It depends that spurious input is as visible as tags like MGH, then it's reasonable that we expect that we can notice something from the explanation methods. But as we vary this different type, different location, and different visibility of the spurious correlation, we start to lose some hope. So what can we learn from this? Well, I hope that I convinced you that good intentions aren't enough, that the truth is that we spent 5 years or 6 years as a community developing a lot of methods on top of gradient, an idea of the gradient. And only 5 or 6 years after, we stumbled upon it, and nobody asked the sanity check question until then. In fact, we didn't set out to ask the sanity question either. We were gonna develop a new method, but then in the middle of that, we're like, oh, let's just check that we don't have a bug in our code. And we ran this and we're like, oh, we have a bug. And we repeatedly and checked it again and again until we discovered that this is actually a phenomenon and not a bug. And I argue that part of the reason is that was that there are confirmation bias was at play. When we looked at that explanation about the bird, it kind of makes sense to us because we expected to see a bird and we saw a bird and we kind of liked it. So nobody really had kind of try to flip that intuitive idea and test that with this manner that we did. And as you can see in the human experiments that I presented, there's no one-size-fits-all methods. We need to test which method is good for the goal that you're trying to achieve, in what domain, and for whom. And many more studies are needed to establish this. Before I go on to next, please do feel free to ask questions. I cannot see the YouTube thing, so I'm going to rely on somebody to tell me if there's a question. So let's jump into the next session. Next, we need to think about how this technology will benefit not just us, but a lot of other people outside of machine learning community. So again, our problem that we're concerning here is post-training interpretability method. You have a trained network and your goal is to answer why was prediction what it was. Now, the way that we answer this question now, the saliency map that we talked about is the following. We say, okay, here's the pixel number 108. It's got floating value of 0.8, and the pixel next to it is 0.9, and the pixel next to it is point whatever. The problem with that is that's not how humans communicate. In fact, we live in a world of analog. We don't live in digital world, at least last time I checked. So why are we communicating to humans using kind of language of computers? So what else should it be? Well, let's think about this. Let's put in ourselves into shoes of a layperson. Perhaps I own a pizza restaurant and I've heard about this machine learning, all the hype. So I bought some model. I trained a model to predict, tell me which pizza is going to be popular. So as a restaurant owner, what do I really want? What kind of explanation would be useful for me? So let's use the saliency map to help us think about that. Okay, so I got this prediction that it says it's going to be popular pizza, and I got this explanation. And as I squint at this picture, I realized that there's some bright pixels on the tomatoes and maybe some crust. Maybe on the wine tube behind the pizza, which makes perfect sense. Good beverage goes a long way with a great pizza. So which one is more important? Because I need to decide whether I'm going to buy better tomato or better wine. And is this true for only this picture or all the popular pizza pictures? Because that's a very different story. In other words, what I really need, what would be useful for me is a quantitative measure of how these high-level concepts are important. Maybe tomato 0.8%, 0.8, cheese 0.3, and wine 0.1, and so on. In other words, I would love to have quantitative explanation of how each concept is important for a prediction of popular pizza, even if the concept was not part of the training, because I only had that idea of these concepts after I saw the results. So we developed a method to do exactly this. It's called Tcap, testing with concept activation vectors. And the idea is pretty simple. I'm going to use this running example to explain how it works. The running example is how important was a striped concept for zebra image classifier. I see the question. I'll answer it after like this little section. All right, so you say, all right, so the concept sounds good, but what is concept? How do you even define concept in neural network? Well, we do kind of the simplest possible thing. We define a concept as a vector, and we named it concept activation vector, or a CAV. To get a CAV, you need a couple of ingredients. One, you need examples of a concept. So in this case, some striped images. And you need random images for the reasons that will be obvious soon. And you have a trained network that you are investigating. And we assume that you have access to the internal tensors, so activations. And to get CAV, what you need is you just train a linear classifier that separates random activations from concept activations. And the vector that is orthogonal to that hyperplane is your CAV. So what is this CAV? Well, it's just a vector that points from random activation direction to concept direction. And of course, this is not a new idea. There has been many work that showed and used there's this semantically meaningful linear direction in neural networks activation. So we're just leveraging that idea again here. So cool. So you have this CAV that represents the concept. What do you do with it? How do you get that quantitative answer, the Tcap score? It's also pretty simple. Here is similar to the Saliency Map. We're going to rely on the sensitivity. So here we define it as, tell me how sensitive the prediction is when we slightly change this concept. And that's called directional derivative. What happens to the prediction if I make this zebra picture a little more stripy or a little less stripy? And we do that for many zebra pictures. And we simply aggregate that statistics by asking, okay, if you have 100 zebra pictures, how many of them output positive directional derivative? So how many of them having striped increase the probability of zebra? And if there are 80 of them, we're gonna say Tcap score 0.8. While this, so a lot of follow-up work changed and modified this Tcap score to fit their bill. Nice thing about this and many other methods that were proposed following up this work is that they're between 0 and 1. So you can compare different models across the scale. So cool, that's cool. Oh, actually, before going that, I'm gonna look at the question in the chat. It can be a general question about ML interpretability. What kind of actionable items can be possible after we realize undesirable models of behaviors? How we fix it? Do explanation provide us insights into how to improve models? Yeah, good question. This is a general question, and perhaps after the third section of my talk, this might become a little more relevant, and let's maybe discuss that after the talk a little more. Thanks for that question. All right, so the first thing when you hear this, this question might bug you in your mind. You go, okay, well, you find this vector in this large high-dimensional space, but we know that high-dimensional space, funky things can happen, like adversarial examples. So how do we know this CAV is legit? How do we know that this doesn't accidentally give us the high directional derivative? Here's one way that we propose in our initial work. It's a quantitative validation. You should always do qualitative validation as well, but this is one way to quantitatively do it. The way that we do it is instead of just getting one CAV, you get multiple CAVs. Because you're using a random set of images to train this CAV, you can plug in as many random sets of images as you want, from which you get many CAVs. Each of which will give you a Tcap score. So at the end of the day, you have a lot of Tcap scores. Then we run statistical testing of the distribution of that Tcap score, compare that to Tcap scores with random CAV. Random CAV meaning instead of concept pictures, you just plug in another random set of images. And only if these two distributions are statistically significantly different, t-test or wash test, whatever you like, then we use this concept to explain. If a concept that users proposed didn't pass this test, and we say, well, sorry, you thought this concept might be important, but it turns out that it isn't important. So here are some cute results we had in the paper, but instead I thought it would be a lot more fun to show you some real results. Since this work came out, lots of people used it, and they've done a lot cooler experiment user studies than I did in my original work. So here's a work came out of King's College London in UK. What they did is they used Tcap to interpret their jointly trained model of the generated model and classification for coronary artery disease, the CAD. And what they're able to show is that you can use this CAV direction in the embedding space to generate images with different concepts. So in this case, left ventricle, for example. And they wrote this thing in their conclusion that made me very excited. They wrote, interpretability using known biomarkers allow the model's prediction to be placed in the context of current medical knowledge and clinical decision-making guidelines. And this is so exciting because this is exactly why we were very excited about Tcap methods, because it speaks the language of the experts in the field who are making the important decisions instead of having them speak computer's language. There's a few other work, one from DeepMind who extended Tcap for RNNs. They proposed a few different ways to define CAVs for sequential data. They verified it with the toy data and applied it in the real world setting for AKI, acute kidney injury. And there are a few others, radiology, breast cancer, and radiomics as well. Another of my favorite work is this. Eric applied Tcap for storm classification models. So given a satellite image, give me what category of a storm this is. And I actually met him after one of my talk at a conference, and he told me about his work. And he told me that selecting the negative images, the random images, to share some similarity with the concept images, which satellite images, it's black and white, was really important to make this work, to make this application successful, which is really interesting and important to know. Here's some published work from Google researchers on an image model and also the language model, and they're able to extend this framework to non-image data. And there's been a few other work from Amazon and from Cynthia Rudin's lab on how to tease out the different factors that are in play in concept learning, either by whitening or using instrumental variable and causal inference framework to kind of erase them out. Really good ideas. Another work from MIT to use these concept idea to further debug again. And this might relate to the question that was asked, the insight that we can get to improve and sort of actionable insight. And this falls into one of those categories. I was really fortunate to see responses from outside of academia too, because at the end of the day, again, we really wanted this work to go out there and be used by people way beyond just machine learning community alone. Sundar talked about this work in his keynote at Google I/O in 2019. He didn't just talk about it, he actually tried to explain how it works, which was amazing, and he did a really good job. This work was received an award, NetExtFlow Award at UNESCO in 2019 as one of cutting-edge digital innovations with potential and profounding and lasting impact. So before going on, please still feel free to ask questions. All right, so the last session, one progress is not enough. Keep asking how to improve existing methods. So you've heard the Tcap thing before, concept sounds good, but what if you don't have concepts? What if you don't know what kind of concepts to use in explaining your model? Can we automate this? This is work with Amirata, a PhD student at Stanford, actually just graduated on automating learning CAVs. So the problem setup is that you don't have the examples of concepts or random images, but you still have the network that you want to investigate. And the way it works is pretty simple. And I love simple ideas put together and working well. And here's like such a great example of that. So what we did is we just used the off-the-shelf superpixel methods, which is just a way to semantically segment an image, well-studied area in computer vision. We took one image and we segmented it in many, many different granularities. So some patches are big, some patches are small. And we collected all those patches, piped it into the network, and clustered them using their activations. And each cluster becomes a candidate for concepts, and we rank them using Tcap scores. Now, when we discover these concepts, the first and very important question is whether the discovered thing, it makes sense to humans. Is it really coherent enough that we can claim that? So we did 2 human experiments to convince ourselves of this. One is the Intruder Test. What it is we give them the 6 pictures, one of which is an odd one. So we intentionally inserted a weird one in there. And we ask humans, can you pick which one doesn't quite belong to this group? Then we compare how well humans did there to human labeled concepts. So in this case, knitted texture thing, which also has one weird one in. Now the humans can perform both either pretty well, so that's comforting. And then second experiment, we selected patches that are learned by ACE, our work, and the other we randomly selected patches from the superpixel method, and we asked them which one is more meaningful to you, and if there is one that's meaningful to you, can you describe it in a word? Like, is it maybe human? Is it car roof or whatever? Now, to my surprise, more than half of people use the same English word to describe what we discovered. So in this case, I think it was like human. And if you count top 2 words, more than 77% use the same word to describe what we discovered, which is very comforting. We didn't stop there. We also did some computational check. So what we discovered, the patches are in fact important for the model. As we add more patches in the order of the importance, we should see prediction accuracy going up quite sharply initially, and then still going up, but a small delta after subsequently. So we tested that. It is true. And if we do it in the other way, if we start adding least important patches first, then you're going to see a curve. Or more below, still going up, but a lot lower slope. And that's exactly what we see. And the random selection should be somewhere in the middle. That's what we see. And we did the same thing in the other way around. We did dilution instead, and the curves are as we expected. Some qualitative results that a few things I really like to point out. One here, look at the dumbbell class on the left bottom. It turns out, and this is kind of well-known fact from Deep Dream work a couple of years ago, that this network doesn't actually see dumbbell. It only sees the humans who are holding the dumbbells. And of course, unfortunately, but not surprisingly, all these humans holding the dumbbells have light color skin. I also really like this example of Jinrikisha class. This is like a cart that human drags. It was able to discover this very complicated borderline of humans. Like if you look at the third one, there's like 2 humans. One has their arms all still carved out, and the other has her face carved out. And then it still finds this very complex patch as the most salient concept. So that's cool. But okay, but how do you know that you have enough? Because you can plug in as many images you want. You can do as many superpixel segmentation as you want. But how do you know that you have enough concepts? This is work with Chikwan Ya, CMU PhD student, where we kind of try to see this problem as a vector space problem. What do I mean? The key idea is to decompose the activation space into concept vectors. So hypothesis here is that if the concept vectors can span the activation space, then we assume all the information neurons have can be expressed in terms of these discovered concepts. So that's what we did. We also modified the Shapley value to score each of these discovered vectors with the Shapley value. And we define completeness in this exact form. It looks complicated. It's actually not that complicated. But the high level idea is that under simple assumptions, this metric is equivalent to top K PCA vectors. So that means it comes with all those nice properties that were well studied about PCA. So that was nice. And here's the results. First, I was really happy to see that ACE is doing the right thing. The blue line is ACE. As you add more concept in the x-axis, the completeness go up. That's good. At least it's not doing anything crazy. And if you look at the k-means, the yellow line, I'm also always fascinated by k-means. If you're a theorist, you're not surprised. But if you're not, then the simplicity of k-means, it always offer very powerful results. And this was not an exception. K-means do pretty well with that simple, elegant algorithm. And ours is the green line, which, we're optimizing directly for the completeness, so it makes sense. And the difference between ACE and this work is that ACE discovered concepts for each class, whereas this one, concepts were discovered across classes. So some concepts might overlap across, like lion and zebra might share some concepts. So that's cool. That we talked about Tcap work. You can automate this, and you can even discover a complete set of concepts. So that's cool. But why are you selecting concepts from your training data set? Haven't you heard about generative models? Can you just generate concepts using generative models? For example, if you have a skin image, a sample image like this, and doctor asks, why is this a skin lesion melanoma? You want to answer using something like all the way on the right. Okay, well, here are different ways that this picture could be changed to change the prediction of yes melanoma or no not melanoma. So that's what we did. This is work with Asma, who's a PhD student at MIT, also just graduated. So the goal here is to generate multiple counterfactual explanation. There are lots of different ways to answer this question, and we've seen heat maps. This is similar to the saliency map idea that we talked about. Segmentation masks that could just carve out the space that is sort of most important and informative for the prediction. Retrieval based, they can go and get another picture that looks kind of like this, or maybe that such that the prediction is flipped or not. You can generate one counterfactual, but based on lots of studies, they show that doctors often kind of have this little argument in their minds that, okay, what would change my decision about this skin sample? What should have been different? And they run many different ideas until they arrive in the final conclusion. So to mirror that sort of thinking process, multiple counterfactual generation might be offering them something that are aligned with how they think about things. So that's what we did. It's called Dissect. The model itself is a little bit complicated, but we leverage a lot of existing great work. So for example, in the generative model, we use cycle again to leverage that consistency. We borrow some ideas from again to have a discriminator that tells us whether the image is real or fake. And we have a disentangler leveraging disentanglement, a huge body of literature in generative model. And in this work, we define what sort of desiderata we want to achieve, like distinct concept traversers, and we wanted each generation to be stable so that if some random input perturbation doesn't completely generate a different picture, and many others. So here's some examples. The EPE mode is our baseline and Dissect is ours. And the skin data set is actually a synthetic data, just so that we know exactly what the ground truth should be. And as you can see, it is able to generate multiple different counterfactuals. And similarly, the 3D shapes data set, Dissect figures out that it's not just the color of the bowl, but also the floor color that matters for this prediction. We know this because we set up the data set in such way so that we can confirm that our work makes sense and does the right thing. So that all sounds good, that you can discover, automate, complete, whatever. But didn't you tell me that you already have these concept labels of stripes and whatnot? Then why don't you just build a new model? Can you just flip that around and insert these model, the concepts in the model? That's what we did in ICML 20. This is work with Pang Wei Ko and Percy. Percy is a faculty at Stanford. Pang Wei is a student at Stanford. And the idea is that, yeah, you have concept labels. Let's just train them with pretending that each neuron represents that concept. You can pre-trivially do that. The first thing to check is whether the performance is impacted by doing so. Unlike some concerns that were raised in lots of discussions, there are no inherent trade-off between performance and interpretability. In fact, interpretability is just type of building a structure in your model. And we've been doing that for centuries. Like regularizer is a type of structure in the model, and some regularizer is actually improve interpretability. So that's again here what we see. Just because we improved interpretability did not influence the performance. In fact, we gained a little bit. What's good about having such concept as a neuron, you can interact and control this model. So if you don't think that trees should matter in predicting zebra, you can cross that out and feed forward to get the prediction of zebra without that concept. And that's what we did. And using this medical data set, if the experts don't think that the symptom X should matter for the diagnosis, then you could potentially intentionally learn a model with that confounding concept just so that you can cancel out, because you know it's there, you just don't want it to influence your final prediction. So we did that with the arthritis data set and show what we expect to see. The performance improves. So cool, Bean. That's a lot of stuff. But what about causality? Isn't causality the final and the ultimate goal of interpretability? Especially when you talk about medical example, what doctors might care is causality, not just a correlation. True that. So we did this work in 20 where we extended this work to causal framework. This is work with Yash, Amir, and Uri. The idea is, again, pretty simple. We want to calculate ATE, but except we named it cake because there are some assumptions that prevents us calling that this is exactly ATE. So what is ATE? Well, let me use an example to explain. Let's say you have a gender classifier F, and you want to know whether the concept of glasses, whether wearing glasses or not, influenced the gender classification. So what is ATE? You have the probability of the gender of this person with the glasses on, and you have, let's suppose for now, same person without the glasses. So let's suppose you have that image, and you subtract those two, and that is ATE. But of course, you don't have this picture. You don't have this picture of a same person without the glasses. So that's why you need a generative model. We explored so many generative models for this work, and it was rather harder to train. And after many trials, these are two ways that we concluded that works well enough for our application. So one, you train encoder and decoder. And one, you can just use the decoder. So you just randomly sample that latent vector Z. And this was conditional VAE, so you can flip the glasses on and glasses off. You can use encoder and decoder together, in which case you can test a particular population. So for example, maybe you want ATE for data sets that are incorrectly classified, for example. And we created this data set that has ground truth. So we have scene data set, and we copied and pasted objects in it. So you might see the shower with the dog in the middle of the image, just so that we have the perfect generative model, and so that we can compare how well this trained generative model do. And and of course we have ground truth. And we show that deck cake actually reaches pretty close to the ground truth cake. So that's all good. But so far we only talked about global explanation, meaning that we only explain what is true in general for all the zebras in my data set, not my specific zebra. Maybe I have a zebra picture from far away. Maybe I have a zebra picture from very up close. What are my concept importance scores in those images I have that I'm interested in? This is ongoing work with Jessica and Sebastian at Google. This is combining Tcap and integrated gradient, which is a very widely used Saliency Map type method. And the idea here is pretty straightforward. So in IG, for those who are not familiar with IG, it's doing pathing in path gradient, integrating along a path. And the path is defined by the same picture with different alpha level. Now, instead of that path, we can integrate with respect to a CAV path, which means that you're changing, instead of alpha, you're changing the concept along that path. So that's what we do. We needed a few baselines. The IG has what called baseline, different from what we typically mean by baseline, but they typically use black images as a baseline, like the start of your integration. We needed a few ideas for concept, because you can't have just a black concept that doesn't really mean anything. So we propose a few different baseline concepts too, concept occluding and concept forgetting. And here are a few cherry-picked cute examples. So the zebras, we have zebras from far away, which has less stripe concept, but more horse concept, which makes sense. Far away, zebras kind of look like horse. And as we get closer and closer to a zebra, you see more and more striped concept and less horse concept. And similar thing happens with the basketball. I want to make sure I have leave time for questions. So I hope I convinced you that good intentions are not enough, and that we need to do our due diligence to test, think about our users, and keep improving. A few things that I want to additionally mention, and things I learned while working with product teams at Google, is that research alone is not enough. This is probably obvious to you. Many of you may, if you've worked in real world application, that papers are not enough. Users sometimes, perhaps most of the time, loves easy tools. They just want to write a few lines of code, and that gets you some explanation. And there's still always the tension between how you want to encourage them to do sort of more work to get higher level, higher quality explanation, but perhaps sometimes holding them to a higher standard might be a better strategy. Using interpretability methods solely focusing on improving trust is not a good idea. In fact, it's a very bad idea. I often going into a project thinking that it will be my best outcome of this is changing the way that people think about the model when they're going into the meeting, and they learn something that they didn't know before. And perhaps that would help them to improve and make the model more robust and align with what they wanted to make from the beginning. Publishing papers, it's not enough. Users have different needs. One paper, I spend many, many more hours to make it work for a particular user, a particular team. Machine learning community alone is not enough. I was reading this article from MIT Tech Review a couple of days ago, yesterday actually, about how there has been 300 something AI tools to help pandemic since the beginning of pandemic. However, after careful review, only apparently 2 of them was ruled as potentially interesting for later. And what if the article is true, there has been no AI tool that could help our humanity in this global crisis. And that's very disappointing, right? And what the paper encouraged AI people to do is like talk to doctors. Why don't you talk to medical experts and see what they need instead of just whipping out this tool that they don't need or doesn't work. So yeah, we need all the expertise, many different parts in solving a problem. With that, I'd love to answer some questions.